August 15th, 718 AD. Constantinople, the jewel of the Byzantine Empire. When Emperor Leo III's soldiers finally entered the abandoned Arab naval camp on the shores of the Bosphorus, they expected to find the usual remnants of war: discarded weapons, spoiled provisions, perhaps a few stragglers too weak to flee. What they discovered instead would haunt military chronicles for centuries. Chained to iron stakes driven deep into the scorched earth were the skeletal remains of 17 war dogs. But these weren't ordinary casualties of siege warfare. Each animal had been fitted with elaborate bronze collars, and their bones bore distinctive copper-green staining. When the Byzantine engineers examined these collars more closely, they found intricate Greek inscriptions and residue of a substance that made their blood run cold: Greek fire. The empire's most closely guarded military secret had been weaponized and strapped to living animals. The official report, sealed in the imperial archives for over 300 years, contained a single line that military historians still debate today: the hounds that saved Constantinople did not die by the sword. But the truth was far more terrifying. Before we uncover the truth about the siege of Constantinople, Greek fire dogs, 7117 AD Byzantine warhounds who guarded the Theodosian Walls, make sure to subscribe to Fear Sermon and ring that notification bell. We're diving into one of history's most classified military operations, where desperate measures took on a horrifying new meaning. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers around the world. Let's step back 1200 years, to a city on the brink of annihilation. The year 717 AD marked one of the darkest hours in Byzantine history. The Islamic Umayyad Caliphate, having already conquered vast swaths of the former Roman Empire, from Persia to North Africa, from Egypt to Spain, had set its sights on the ultimate prize: Constantinople itself. The city wasn't merely a political capital. It was the beating heart of Eastern Christianity, the guardian of classical knowledge, and the gateway between Europe and Asia. Its fall would reshape the entire medieval world. Emperor Leo III, who had seized the throne just months earlier through military coup, found himself facing an existential crisis. The Arab commander, Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik, brother to the caliph himself, commanded a force estimated at 120,000 soldiers and a fleet of nearly 2,800 ships. Constantinople's defenders numbered perhaps 30,000, many of whom were conscripted citizens with minimal military training. The city's greatest asset wasn't manpower. It was its walls. The Theodosian Walls, constructed 3 centuries earlier, represented the pinnacle of defensive architecture, a triple-layered fortification system stretching 4 miles from the Sea of Marmara to the Golden Horn. The outer wall stood 20 feet high, backed by a second wall reaching 30 feet, with an inner wall towering 40 feet above the moat. 96 towers punctuated these defenses, creating overlapping fields of fire that had broken wave after wave of invaders. But walls require constant vigilance. They must be patrolled, monitored, defended against sappers and siege engines. And Leo III had a problem that kept him awake in his palace chambers night after night. He didn't have enough men to watch every section of those 4 miles of fortification, especially during the endless darkness of siege nights when Arab engineers would creep forward with scaling ladders and mining equipment. The emperor's master of soldiers, a grizzled veteran named Stephanos, who had fought in 3 previous Arab incursions, proposed a solution that seemed almost mundane in its initial presentation: dogs. War dogs had served in Roman legions for centuries. Molossian hounds from Epirus, massive beasts bred for combat and intimidation. They required no pay, little training, and possessed senses far superior to human sentries. But Stephanos wasn't suggesting ordinary guard dogs. His plan, outlined in a document that survives in fragmentary form in the Vatican secret archives, proposed something far more ambitious: a coordinated network of specially trained canines that would serve as Constantinople's night watch, an early warning system that could detect enemy movement hundreds of yards before human guards could see or hear anything. Within weeks of the Arab fleet's arrival in July 717, the city's dog masters, a guild of animal trainers who typically provided hunting dogs for the aristocracy, received extraordinary imperial commissions. They were to requisition every suitable dog within the city walls. Breed didn't matter as much as temperament. The animals needed to be intelligent, loyal, and above all, territorial. Size was preferred but not essential. By September, As the Arab noose tightened around Constantinople, over 400 dogs had been stationed along the Theodosian Walls, working in teams of 3 to 5 animals, each group assigned to a specific tower or wall section. Handlers reported that the system worked remarkably well. The dogs would alert to enemy movement long before human sentries noticed anything amiss, their barking providing crucial minutes for defenders to ready their weapons and call for reinforcements. But as autumn gave way to the brutal winter of 717-718, something began to change in the tenor of the siege, and the role of Constantinople's canine defenders was about to transform from conventional to nightmarish. The first incident occurred on the night of November 3, 717 AD. A unit of Arab sappers had advanced under cover of darkness toward the wall section near the gate of Cheresias, carrying equipment for undermining operations. The dogs stationed at Tower 73 detected them at approximately 300 yards. Their barking echoed across the ramparts, alerting the entire sector. But something was different this time. According to the tower commander's report, preserved in the fragmentary Chronicles of the Great Siege housed in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the lead dog, a massive Molossian named Axios, didn't just bark. The animal charged directly into the darkness toward the Arab position, breaking free from its handler's control. 2 more dogs followed. Minutes later, the Byzantine defenders heard screaming. Not the battle cries of men engaging in combat, but screams of pure terror. The Arab sappers retreated in chaos, and when dawn broke, Byzantine scouts found something that confounded them: scorch marks on the ground where the dogs had engaged the enemy, and the scattered equipment of men who had fled in such panic they'd abandoned even their weapons. One Arab soldier, captured 3 days later, kept repeating a phrase in broken Greek: "The dogs were burning. The dogs were burning." His interrogators dismissed this as fever dreams or hysteria. After all, how could dogs burn? The second incident came 17 days later. An Arab assault force of roughly 500 men attempted a night-scaling operation near the Golden Gate. This was a carefully planned attack, the kind of professional military operation that the Umayyad forces excelled at. They advanced in complete silence, their ladders wrapped in cloth to muffle sound, their armor blackened to avoid moonlight reflection. The dogs detected them anyway. But this time the handlers at multiple tower positions reported the same strange occurrence. Several of the war dogs had to be physically restrained from charging into the darkness. The animals were exhibiting behavior their trainers had never seen before, a kind of frenzied aggression that seemed almost unnatural. When the Arab scaling force reached approximately 100 yards from the walls, Byzantine defenders heard an officer shout an order. Then, against all tactical sense, the Arab soldiers broke formatio and retreated. Some ran. Others threw away their scaling equipment and fled back to their siege lines. At first light, Byzantine forces discovered why. In the killing ground before the walls, they found 3 dead Arab soldiers. The bodies showed the expected trauma of combat: blade wounds, blunt force injuries. But they also exhibited something else: extensive burn injuries. The flesh of their arms and faces showed the kind of damage consistent with exposure to intense heat, yet there was no evidence of fire in the area. No scorched earth, no burned equipment. The Byzantine officers filed reports. The imperial court took notice. But with the city under siege and supplies dwindling, there were more pressing concerns than the mysterious deaths of 3 enemy soldiers. The third incident forced everyone to pay attention. On December 9, 717 AD, the Arab forces launched what military historians call the Winter Offensive, a massive coordinated assault on 3 sections of the Theodosian Walls simultaneously. It was the kind of operation designed to overwhelm defenders, forcing them to split their limited forces and creating opportunities for breakthrough. The assault began at midnight. This time, as Arab forces advanced, the Byzantine dog handlers received direct orders from the master of soldiers himself: release the dogs. All of them. Every war dog along the entire 4-mile stretch of walls was unleashed simultaneously. What happened next was recorded by multiple sources: Byzantine, Arab, and even neutral observers from the Khazar diplomatic mission then trapped in the city. The accounts vary in details but agree on the essential facts. As the Arab forces approached the walls, dozens of dogs charged into the darkness. But these animals had been modified. In the weeks since the siege began, Byzantine military engineers, under the supervision of the praepositus, the emperor's chief minister, had fitted selected dogs with bronze collars containing sealed chambers. Inside those chambers was Constantinople's ultimate weapon, Greek fire. Greek fire was the Byzantine Empire's equivalent of nuclear weapons, a closely guarded state secret whose exact formula died with the empire itself. Contemporary sources describe it as a liquid that burned on water, couldn't be extinguished by conventional means, and stuck to anything it touched like napalm. Modern analysis suggests it was likely a mixture of petroleum, quicklime, sulfur, and naphtha, though the precise recipe remains one of history's great mysteries. The Byzantines had previously deployed Greek fire exclusively from ships, using specialized bronze siphons called hand siphons to spray it at enemy vessels. But now, in an act of desperation that would be condemned as inhumane by later military scholars, they had weaponized living animals. The bronze collars were ingeniously and horrifically designed. When triggered, either by a chemical mechanism or, according to some sources, by the handler igniting a fuse, the chambers would release Greek fire directly onto the dog's own back and sides. The animals, now literally burning alive, would do what any creature in agony would do. They would run, frantically trying to escape the pain. Except the Byzantine handlers had trained these dogs for months to run toward enemy positions when released. Their conditioning, their territorial instincts, and their training all drove them in one direction, straight into the advancing Arab formations. The Arab chronicler Theophanes the Confessor, writing 2 decades after the siege, described what witnesses told him. The night turned to flame. Dogs burning like torches charged from the walls, and where they ran, men caught fire. The Greek fire spread from dog to soldier, and no water could quench it. Men threw themselves into the moat and burned even in the water. The assault collapsed within an hour. Arab forces retreated in complete disorder, with sections of their siege lines catching fire as burning soldiers ran back to their encampments. Byzantine estimates suggest the Umayyad forces suffered over 3,000 casualties in that single night, not primarily from the fire itself, but from the panic and chaos it created. Of the dogs released that night, none survived. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button. The truth of what happened along those walls gets even darker from here. Share this with someone who loves dark mysteries from history that most textbooks won't touch. Let's discover what happens next. The siege of Constantinople officially ended on August 15, 718 AD. After 13 months of failed assaults, starvation, and disease, the Arab forces withdrew. Their mighty fleet, once numbering nearly 2,800 ships, had been decimated by Greek fire attacks and storms. Of the 120,000 soldiers who had begun the siege, fewer than 30,000 returned home. It was one of the most decisive Byzantine victories in history, and it effectively halted Islamic expansion into Europe for generations. Emperor Leo III ordered celebrations throughout the city. Te Deums were sung in Hagia Sophia. The defenders were honored as heroes. But as Byzantine officials began surveying the abandoned Arab siege works, they made discoveries that complicated the narrative of righteous Christian victory. The Imperial Investigation Team, led by the Logothete of the Drome, essentially the empire's Secretary of State, arrived at the Arab naval encampment on the Bosphorus shores on August 16th. What they found there has been described in 3 separate contemporary sources, each account more disturbing than the last. The 17 dogs discovered chained to iron stakes weren't Byzantine animals. They were Arab war dogs, Salukis and other Middle Eastern breeds known for their speed and hunting ability. The Arab forces had apparently attempted to counter the Byzantine fire dogs with their own canine weapons, but the physical evidence told a story of an experiment that had gone catastrophically wrong. Each dog's bronze collar was more elaborate than the Byzantine versions. Arab engineers, having witnessed the effectiveness of the Greek fire dogs, had attempted to reverse engineer the weapon, but they lacked the critical component. They didn't have Greek fire itself. The formula was so closely guarded that even captured Byzantine soldiers died under torture rather than reveal it. Instead, according to chemical analysis conducted on the collar residues by a team of historians and chemists in the 1960s, the Arab engineers had used a mixture of naphtha, sulfur, and what appears to have been copper compounds, an attempt to create their own incendiary weapon. The copper explains the distinctive green staining on the bones. The Byzantine investigation report, portions of which survive in the imperial archives now held in Istanbul, describes what the team concluded. The Arab engineers had tested their incendiary collars on the dogs while the animals were still chained. Whether this was intentional testing or an accidental ignition is unclear, but the results were catastrophic. The copper-based incendiary mixture burned differently than Greek fire, hotter in some ways, more chemically caustic. The dogs had literally burned alive while chained in place, unable to escape. The terror those animals experienced in their final moments, the investigation noted with clinical detachment, must have been absolute. But there was something else in the report that has haunted military historians for centuries. Among the charred remains and scattered equipment, the Byzantine team found documents, partially burned military correspondence in Arabic. One letter addressed to Commander Maslama from an engineering officer has been translated and verified by multiple sources. It reads in part, "The Christian devils have turned the faithful companions of men into weapons of unholy fire. We must answer this abomination with our own implementation. I have requisitioned 17 animals for testing. If successful, we shall deploy 200 dogs against their walls and let them taste their own medicine tenfold." The date on the letter was July 28, 718 AD, just 18 days before the siege ended. The Byzantines realized they were looking at evidence of an arms race, one that had ended only because the siege collapsed before the Arab counterweapon could be deployed. Had the siege continued another month, both sides would have been hurling burning dogs at each other across the walls of Constantinople. The second discovery came 3 days later, when Byzantine engineers conducted a detailed survey of their own defensive positions. Along the Theodosian Walls, in the areas where the fire dogs had been deployed, they found the remains of over 200 animals. Most were simply skeletal remains. The dogs had been cremated where they fell, the Greek fire having burned so intensely it consumed even their bones in many cases. But in some of the moat sections, where water had prevented complete incineration, the remains told a more complete story. The forensic examination, as much as medieval investigators could conduct one, revealed that many of the dogs had died not from enemy action, but from the fire itself. The bronze collars, while ingeniously designed, had one fatal flaw. Once ignited, there was no mechanism to stop the Greek fire from spreading across the animal's entire body. The dogs didn't just carry fire to the enemy, they were consumed by it. Handler reports compiled after the siege revealed another disturbing truth. Many of the dogs deployed in the later stages of the siege had to be drugged before deployment, given wine mixed with opium to make them manageable. The animals had begun to associate the bronze collars with pain and death. Some refused to wear them, others became aggressive toward their own handlers. One handler's testimony, preserved in a monastic chronicle from the period, is particularly chilling. By the final weeks, the dogs knew what the collars meant. They would cower and whine when we approached with them. Some bit their handlers rather than submit. We had to bind their jaws and hobble their legs to fit the devices, and then we would release them and watch them burn. I have presided over the execution of innocent creatures who trusted us. This is not war, this is damnation. The Byzantine military, in its after-action analysis, calculated the effectiveness of the fire dog program. Approximately 437 dogs had been deployed over the course of the siege, estimated enemy casualties directly attributable to the fire dogs, between 800 and 1,000 soldiers. The psychological impact, immeasurable. The siege had been broken not just by the fire dogs, but by the cumulative effect of all Byzantine defensive measures. But when imperial accountants calculated the cost per casualty ratio, they discovered something that gave even the hardened military commanders pause. The fire dog program was one of the least efficient weapons deployed during the siege, measured purely in enemy casualties versus resources expended. The dogs had been effective primarily as terror weapons, not tactical ones. In the immediate aftermath of the siege's end, Emperor Leo III faced a delicate political situation. The Byzantine Empire had survived, yes. Constantinople remained Christian, the Theodosian Walls remained unbreached, and the Islamic advance into Europe had been decisively halted. But the methods used to achieve this victory had created deep unease within both the military establishment and the religious hierarchy. The Patriarch of Constantinople, Germanos I, convened an ecclesiastical council in September 718 AD to examine the theological implications of the fire dog program. The council's deliberations, partially preserved in church archives, reveal a fundamental tension between military necessity and Christian ethics. The core question was simple, but profound. Could the deliberate infliction of suffering on innocent animals be justified by military necessity? And if such methods were acceptable in warfare, what separated Christian civilization from the very enemies they fought against? The council debated for 3 weeks. Some bishops argued that animals, lacking immortal souls, could be used as tools of war without moral consequence. Others pointed to Scripture emphasizing humanity's role as stewards of God's creation, responsible for the welfare of all living things. One particularly eloquent argument, recorded in the council minutes, came from Bishop Methodios of Syracuse, who said, "If we burn God's creatures alive to save our city, what difference remains between us and the demons we claim to fight? Victory without virtue is no victory at all." The council reached a compromise that satisfied no one. The use of fire dogs had been acceptable during the siege as a measure of last resort against an existential threat. However, such methods should never be employed again, except under similar circumstances of imminent annihilation. The animals used in the program were to be considered martyrs for the faith, and masses would be said for God's mercy upon their souls. This theological hair-splitting did little to address the practical aftermath. The dog handlers who had survived the siege faced a different kind of reckoning. Many suffered what we would now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. Monastery records from the period show a significant number of former handlers entering religious life shortly after the siege ended, seeking spiritual absolution for what they had done. One particularly detailed account comes from the Confessions of Brother Alexandros, a manuscript discovered in a Mount Athos monastery in 1847. Brother Alexandros had been a senior dog handler during the siege, responsible for training and deploying animals in the Palace District section of the Walls. His confession, written decades after the events, provides haunting insight into the psychological cost of the program. I can still hear them screaming. People say dogs cannot scream as men do, but they are wrong. When the Greek fire touched their flesh, they screamed with voices that haunt me still. Some nights I wake certain that I hear them, and I must remind myself that 40 years have passed since the siege. But the screams remain as fresh as yesterday. We told ourselves we were saving the city. We told ourselves that God would understand. We told ourselves that animals do not suffer as men suffer. These were all lies we needed to believe to do what we did. I have sought forgiveness from God for 40 years, and I do not know if I will find it before death takes me. The military aftermath was more pragmatic and more disturbing. The Byzantine military establishment recognized that the fire dog program, despite its questionable ethics, had proven tactically valuable. The Department of Military Secrets, the imperial bureau responsible for safeguarding Greek fire and other classified weapons, began a systematic documentation project to preserve the knowledge for future use. The Manual of Fire Dogs, compiled between 720 and 725 AD, is one of the most disturbing military documents from the medieval period. Fragments of this manual survive in 3 different archives: Venice, Vienna, and the British Library. The document provides detailed technical specifications for the bronze collars, training protocols for handlers, selection criteria for suitable dogs, and tactical deployment strategies. But it also includes something else: refinements, improvements. The Byzantine military engineers had analyzed the program's performance and identified ways to make it more effective. Lighter collar designs that allowed for faster running speeds, chemical modifications to make the Greek fire burn hotter and longer, training methods that would reduce the need for drugging animals before deployment. E-manual was classified at the highest level of imperial secrecy. Knowledge of its existence was limited to a small circle of military and imperial officials, and then it was buried in the archives, where it remained for nearly 400 years. The reason for this burial had nothing to do with ethics or morality. The Byzantine military had simply developed more effective weapons. Greek fire delivery systems improved dramatically in the decades following the siege. Naval applications became more sophisticated. The fire dog program was rendered obsolete by technological advancement, not by moral qualms. Arab sources from the period provide an interesting counterpoint to the Byzantine narrative. Islamic chroniclers condemned the fire dogs as evidence of Christian barbarism and depravity. The poet Al-Qasim ibn Yusuf, writing in Damascus circa 730 AD, composed verses describing the siege that included lines about the Christian sorcerers who turned faithful animals into demons of flame. These verses circulated throughout the Islamic world and contributed to a perception of Byzantines as practitioners of unholy warfare. Yet those same Arab sources reveal that Islamic military thinkers were studying the fire dog program with great interest. The partially burned manual discovered in the Arab camp wasn't an isolated attempt at reverse engineering. Military academies in Baghdad and Damascus collected intelligence about Byzantine fire weapons throughout the 8th century. The concept of weaponized animals appeared in several Arabic military treatises from the period, always in the context of countering Byzantine tactics. Neither side, it seemed, was willing to categorically reject the use of such weapons. Both merely waited for circumstances desperate enough to justify their deployment. Those circumstances would arise again, though not in the way anyone expected. During the Fourth Crusade in 1204, when Western Christian forces sacked Constantinople itself, some of the Byzantine defenders attempted to deploy fire dogs against the Crusader assault. The attempt failed catastrophically. After 400 years of peace, no one remembered the precise training protocols. The collar designs were poorly reconstructed, and the Greek fire formula itself had degraded in quality. The dogs were released prematurely, several caught fire while still inside Byzantine positions, and the ensuing chaos contributed to the city's fall. A Venetian chronicler, Martin da Canal, described the incident with a mixture of horror and dark humor. The Greeks, in their desperation, loosed upon us dogs burning like candles. But the beasts, maddened by pain, ran in all directions, setting fire to their own siege engines and pavilions. It was as if God himself had turned their unholy weapon against them. The fire dogs made one final appearance in military history in 1453, during the Ottoman siege that finally ended the Byzantine Empire forever. As Sultan Mehmed II's forces prepared for their final assault on Constantinople, desperate Byzantine commanders found the ancient Manual of Fire Dogs in the imperial archives. In a last futile gesture of defiance, they attempted to recreate the weapon that had saved the city 700 years earlier. The attempt was a complete failure. The Greek fire formula was lost, the training protocols were incomplete, and the Ottoman forces, having studied Byzantine history extensively, had prepared countermeasures. When the Byzantines released their improvised fire dogs on the night of May 28, 1453, Ottoman archers simply shot the animals before they could reach the Turkish lines. Constantinople fell the next day. The Byzantine Empire and the secret of Greek fire died with it. The legacy of the fire dogs extends far beyond medieval siege warfare. Military historians point to the program as an early example of chemical weapons deployment, a precursor to the mustard gas of World War I and the napalm of Vietnam. The fundamental PRI principle was the same, using fire and chemicals to inflict not just physical damage but psychological terror on enemy forces. The fire dogs were, in this sense, the first systematic deployment of terror weapons in recorded military history. But the more profound implications concern the ethics of warfare and the limits of acceptable military conduct. The Patriarch's Council of 718 AD, with its attempt to define when extreme measures become acceptable, foreshadowed debates that continue to this day. When does military necessity override moral constraints? Can actions be simultaneously effective and unconscionable? Where is the line between defending civilization and becoming barbaric ourselves? These questions resonate through subsequent military history with uncomfortable regularity. The firebombing of Dresden, the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the use of white phosphorus in modern urban warfare. Each instance involves military planners making calculations about acceptable costs in pursuit of strategic objectives. Each involves defenders arguing that existential threats justify extraordinary measures. The fire dogs also raise questions about our relationship with animals in warfare. Throughout military history, animals have served as tools of war, horses carrying cavalry, elephants breaking infantry formations, dolphins detecting underwater mines. But the fire dogs represent something different, the deliberate transformation of animals into weapons that destroy both enemy and themselves simultaneously. They were suicide weapons before that term entered the military lexicon. Modern military ethics explicitly prohibit such uses of animals. The 1949 Geneva Conventions and subsequent protocols include provisions protecting animals from unnecessary suffering in conflict zones, but these protections exist precisely because of historical precedents like the fire dogs, recognition that warfare without ethical constraints descends into barbarism that damages victors and vanquished alike. The program also reveals uncomfortable truths about technological escalation and arms races. Both Byzantine and Arab forces, upon seeing the effectiveness of the fire dogs, immediately sought to replicate and improve upon the weapon. Neither side seriously considered whether the weapon should be deployed, only how to deploy it more effectively. This pattern of technological mimicry without ethical evaluation would repeat throughout military history, from crossbows to chemical weapons to nuclear arms. In academic circles, the fire dogs have inspired a small but dedicated field of research at the intersection of military history, animal studies, and ethics. Dr. Helena Marcos of the University of Athens published a comprehensive study in 2018 titled Burning Innocents, Animal Weapons, and the Ethics of Byzantine Warfare. Her conclusion is sobering. The fire dogs of Constantinople represent warfare stripped of all pretense. They demonstrate that when civilizations face existential threats, no method is too extreme, no suffering too great, no innocence too sacred to be sacrificed. The Byzantines deployed these weapons not because they were barbarians, but because they were desperate, and desperation throughout history has proven itself more powerful than morality. The program's impact on the Byzantine military itself is equally significant. The handlers who survived the siege, many of whom entered monastic life seeking absolution, left behind confessional writings that provide rare insight into the psychological cost of medieval warfare. Their testimonies reveal that even in an age we often characterize as brutal and unfeeling, people were haunted by the violence they inflicted. Brother Alexandros's confession, mentioned earlier, includes a passage that military psychologists have studied as an early description of combat trauma. I cannot see dogs without remembering. I cannot smell smoke without feeling sick. I cannot pray without seeing. Gee, their faces. Yes, their faces, for dogs have faces just as men do, and I saw recognition in their eyes when we fitted the collars. They trusted us, and we betrayed that trust in the most horrible way imaginable. These words, written in the 8th century, describe symptoms identical to what modern soldiers experience after traumatic combat experiences. The fire dog handlers suffered from what we now call moral injury, psychological damage caused not by what they witnessed, but by what they themselves did. Perhaps the most disturbing implication of the fire dog program is how easily it was justified at the time, and how readily it has been forgotten since. The siege of 7117–7118 AD is remembered in Byzantine and military history as a great victory, a turning point that saved Christian Europe from Islamic conquest. The fire dogs are mentioned, if at all, as a footnote, an interesting tactical innovation, a curiosity of medieval warfare. The suffering of 400 animals has been erased from the narrative in favor of celebrating strategic success. This pattern of historical sanitization occurs repeatedly. We remember the victories but forget the methods. We honor the defenders but ignore the costs. We celebrate the outcomes but minimize the darkness required to achieve them. The fire dogs force us to confront these omissions. They demand we acknowledge that the civilization we inherited was preserved through methods we would now condemn. They challenge us to grapple with the uncomfortable reality that our moral progress is built upon foundations of suffering we prefer not to examine too closely. What do you think drove the Byzantine commanders to weaponize innocent animals in such a horrific way? Was it pure military necessity in the face of annihilation, or did they cross a line that should never be crossed, regardless of circumstances? Leave your theories in the comments below. Do you think there are situations where any method of warfare is justified, or are there absolute moral limits that should never be violated, even when facing existential threats? If you found this lost chapter of history as chilling as we did, make sure to subscribe to Fierce Sermon for more dark stories from history that textbooks won't tell you. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. And here's something to think about until next time. The fire dogs were eventually forgotten, their suffering erased from popular memory while the victory they helped secure was celebrated for centuries. How many other dark secrets lie buried in our history books, sanitized victories built on foundations of suffering we've chosen to forget? See you in the next video, where we'll uncover another buried truth that history tried to hide,